Yo, so what's up, guys? So today I thought I would talk about my entire Japanese learning journey, and yes, this has been the same Ben that Matt vs. Japan interviewed back in 2018, and maybe I'll talk about that as well, me meeting Matt and so on. But yeah, it's actually kind of funny because I have been back to Matt's 3-hour video multiple times, and I thought at some point that I should do my own rendition of just talking about my entire Japanese learning journey and things I experienced along the way to the best of my ability, because at this point some details are kind of, fuzzy, but I'm going to do my best, and this is going to be as raw as possible, meaning that if I make any mistakes, if I stumble, if I say something stupid, then I don't really give a shit. I'm just going to keep it in. And yeah, this video is probably going to have a lot of vulgar language in it too, so yeah, you've been warned, but this is going to be a pretty long video, and yeah, so grab some snacks or popcorn, whatever, and yeah, let's get into it. Anyways, so just a little bit about me first. I'm now 24 years old, and I started studying Japanese at age 16. So yeah, that's basically all you really need to know. And yeah, so let's hop into how I started learning Japanese. I do have a bit of an outline here so that I don't end up going all over the place, and hopefully I can stay on one thing, because I have this really bad habit of really just going off and talking about something that I had no intention of talking about when I was supposed to stick to a certain subject. So let's hope I can avoid that in this video. And also I should note that this is just going to be me, talking. I'm not going to have my video or have my face on video like Matt did, because that kind of, distracts me a little bit. I feel like I can't concentrate knowing that, I'm seeing myself on film. So yeah, whatever. I'm just going to film the, audio here, and then I'm going to edit that into some, I guess moving images or whatever the fuck. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But anyways, that's enough. Let's hop into how I started studying Japanese. And yeah, this of course takes us back to 2014, right? Very, very, very long ago. The beginning of 2014, actually. So, up until that point in my life, I was about 15 to 16 at the time. I had really never had any kind of idea that I was going to study Japanese. It wasn't anything I was really interested in, although I guess in certain circumstances, Japanese was already part of my life, or at least influence from Japan was part of my life from a very young age, like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. And also a handful of video games I used to play, right? Games like Ace Attorney and, other things like that. Dinosaur King, just a bunch of games that originated from Japan and media and so on. I really didn't have any actual connection to Japan. I didn't really feel like I was ever going to be there, nor did I really feel like I was ever going to learn the language or another language. So that kind of just hit me out of the blue. And of course, what was happening was at some point in my sophomore year in high school, I was staying after school with a close friend of mine, and who I'm still close friends with to this day. And we were just talking, and I think we were expecting a snow day. And he was talking to his geometry teacher, I believe, from freshman year. And I was there as well, and she taught my sister. So, we were just talking amongst ourselves, and because my friend and I are Asian, I believe she asked us if we knew Japanese or something to that degree. And my friend said no, but I want to learn it. And I believe this came up in conversation because one of the teachers in the school used to teach Japanese when it was actually part of the curriculum, but then it got pulled from the curriculum, so they basically didn't offer it anymore as a potential language you could study. And yeah, for some reason that really stuck with me when my friend said no, but I want to learn it. That kind of just gave me an idea. It was kind of unconscious. I didn't really, pay attention to it at the time, but I just kind of, that was the kikkake, it was like the the catalyst to me getting into it. And man, that was so cringy. But anyways, let's just keep on going here. So basically my friend was an anime fan, and I was totally, not into anime at the time. I had never really watched it aside from maybe some Pokemon in English and stuff like that. I had really never watched any anime. It was kind of funny. My sister had watched it when she was in 8th grade and stuff like that, but I never got into it. But one thing led to another. And at some point I thought to myself, dude, this is kind of cool, Japanese is kind of cool. I thought back to my friend talking about learning Japanese, and I thought, maybe we should give this a try. So I hit him up one day on Facebook and was like, dude, maybe we should study Japanese. And he was like, all right, I'm down. And so I started, getting into the basic stuff like the alphabet. And we're talking about, hiragana, katakana, 46 basic characters. I decided to just, go all in and just memorize these. And it was really exciting because for the first time in my life, it was kind of like a personal endeavor. It wasn't something that was forced upon me in school. It was just something that I just felt like I should do. And so when I was in school, I was just writing things out in my notebook, and I was, trying to memorize how to write them, albeit with the wrong stroke orders and stuff like that. But it was just really exciting. And after struggling for a little bit, I did learn hiragana and katakana by heart. And I also did some typical things that you would see language learners do, such as, I would look up basic phrases, things on YouTube, tutorials, all kinds of stuff. I just started really getting into the rabbit hole here. And it was all really exciting because you know how it is in the beginning of anything. You just really, really identify with something because it's all new and it's all exciting and you have no idea where it's going to go. Plus, it's kind of cool. Like, you feel really cool when you can just say something in another language, even if you don't really understand what it is you're saying. So I just hopped around, did some stuff on Japanese Pod 101, just watched some basic, videos about greetings and so on. And of course, after that happened for a while, I kind of just fell off because I didn't really know what to do from there. There was nothing really coherent I could do to plan it. But, I went all over the place. I started watching videos by people like Benny the Irish Polyglot and, just people talking in Japanese and stuff. And it really fired me up. I thought it was really cool. And I wanted to learn how to, use the language, understand it, speak it, and so on. So, I just kept on digging and digging, and my friend had a Genki textbook. My dad also had one because he just studied Japanese for fun one time when my sister got into it. And so my friend and I brought our Genki books to school, and we would just, go through some of the lessons and stuff like that. Or we tried to, go through them and try to memorize some stuff. And he was ahead of me at this point by a pretty good margin just because he had been watching anime. And even if you don't actually actively try to, study Japanese using it, I feel like certain things kind of just seep in, because you hear them enough times or whatever the case is, right? So we just did this for a little bit, but obviously that didn't last either because it wasn't really coherent and it wasn't a structured kind of pattern to, the studying. There wasn't really a structured pattern. That's what I meant to say. So, obviously that didn't go very far. And obviously there was the other aspect of the writing systems that I could not figure out, which was kanji, right? That was a very challenging obstacle to me, and I could not figure out how the hell I was going to do it because, first of all, I didn't know much about kanji. And yes, you guys know that I'm of Asian descent, but I should also, say right now that I didn't have any kind of leg up as far as kanji goes. Like, my parents, or my dad specifically, my mom's Vietnamese, my dad is Chinese. He tried to teach me Chinese when I was a kid. It was basically just rote memorization, and, I didn't understand shit. So it's like, that basically doesn't count. If I hopped into kanji, I probably would have known how to write 1 to 10, and that's literally it. So as far as that goes, I want to also just say straight up that I didn't have a leg up. But back to the kanji, I didn't even know how many kanji there were. I literally was a total noob to Japanese. I had no idea that, the Joyo kanji existed and stuff like that. So I just started digging, and I started finding some interesting things about the Japanese kanji and how to learn them correctly, right? Because I tried things like rote memorization. It just didn't feel like it was going anywhere. It literally was just me spinning my wheels and then forgetting things and then writing things with the shitty stroke order, and they just looked horrible as well. So I obviously knew I needed to find a more, coherent study method to actually tackle this stuff. So I went ahead and looked around, and I found a video by tkyosam, which was the very first time I ever heard of AJATT.com. And or alljapaneseallthetime.com. He basically talked about doing something called remembering the kanji, and he talked about using an SRS, things like that. And at this point, I had never heard anything of this sort before. But obviously, I stumbled upon it, and I did stumble upon Khatzumoto's speaking Japanese video because at that time, I feel like that blog was still floating all around the place. It was really popular, and I did happen to stumble upon it. But, that was the very first place that I found out about AJATT was Tkyosam How to Learn 2,000 Japanese Kanji in 2 months video. And, he talked about RTK, he talked about, spaced repetition. And that's really like where everything kind of took off. Not immediately, but I started that a little bit. I didn't really understand the method after watching his video. But, nevertheless, those two things still stuck in my mind, RTK and anki, or, spaced repetition in general. So I kept looking into this stuff. I found other people's videos reviewing RTK and how, a lot of people said that it helped them learn kanji very quickly and very effectively. I found Patrick's video. Patrick is, I always looked up to him. He was basically, one of the pioneers of, the AJATT method, as far as like, people who really took things to the extreme and actually ended up getting fluent. I found his videos that he made when he was just a kid, and he talked about finishing RTK. He was like 13 at the time. It was kind of wild to see, but like he basically talked about it a little bit, and it was really, really awesome to see. And then I also found out about Abroad in Japan's channel. He was pretty small at the time relative to now. He was still at like 70,000 followers or something like that, but obviously that's nothing compared to where he is today. But I found a video by him called, How to Learn Kanji the Fun Way. I'm not sure if that's really still what it's called, but it's definitely still on YouTube. And, he talked about making stories, and he did break down the RTK method to the point where I really saw how you were supposed to do it and what you were supposed to do and why it was supposed to work with the radicals and, the stories and so on. So that is where everything really took off, and this was about May 2014 at the time. So when I found out about this, I said to myself, okay, we're going to do this. I don't know necessarily where this is going to lead, but RTK seems like the thing to do next. So, I got a copy of RTK, and I got Anki, and I found a pre-made deck for all of the RTK kanji, and I started doing 20 kanji a day. And that was my goal, was just to see if it would work. So I decided to do that. I started writing some stories, and, one thing led to another, and I found out that after 1 to 2 days of doing this, I could actually recall the kanji from memory, like I could write it out, and I could actually tell you what the kanji meant, and that was like really shocking to me. I was like, whoa, like this actually kind of works, And not kind of, it literally worked. I'm like, this is amazing. This is awesome. I'm actually learning how to write these kanji characters. So let's just keep doing it. And so I kept on doing that every day. I started doing 20 kanji a day. And, obviously at that rate, it was going to take me about 100 days to finish the entire book. But I was getting really motivated because, basically what was happening was I would look at some Japanese pages here and there. And, the more I learned, the more I started to recognize the characters all over the place. And so, and when I watched Patrick's video, he talked about, like, by the time you reach, like, the 2,000 mark, almost every kanji that you see, you will have already recognized because you have learned it from the book. So I thought to myself, okay, this is pretty cool. And, I kept on doing it. And I also started getting into anime around that point, too. Like, I started watching anime. And obviously, because I had never seen it before, it was like something totally new to me, the plots, the characters, all that stuff. It was just really, really awesome to me. And that really, fueled me even further, as far as doing the RTK method and so on. So that was definitely, one of those things that kind of just came full circle. And I was watching a lot of Mads, I was going to school listening to, Haruhi Suzumiya's God Knows, on my iPod. And, all sorts of other stuff. I was watching Mads, like there's this one called like Love is a Beautiful Pain or whatever. And I found out about Fate Zero from that, which went on to be one of my favorite anime of all time. It was just a really, really awesome time of my life. I'd consider that to be like the last time I really felt any real excitement in my life, because I was still like 16 years old at this point, and everything was just, everything was still like brand new, and I had a lot to look forward to in my life, But anyways, at that point, I was still doing RTK. I kept on doing it, kept it up. And, just to, I guess, fast forward to what happened was, by the time I reached the end of it, I had not skipped a single day. I'd actually stayed with the kanji 20 a day, all the way up until, I believe, August 22nd, 2014. That's when I finished RTK. And I basically, I had achieved what I set out to do. I learned how to write all 2,000 plus kanji that were in that book. Very consistently, I basically had a 99% retention rate in Anki. I didn't really mess up that often. And, I was pretty well acquainted with the kanji characters at this point. Like the radical system, it all made sense to me. I was not intimidated by kanji anymore after this point. And then after that, I decided, and if you guys want to see like when I finished RTK, I do have another video on my channel, the actual original video that I made when I was 16 years old. You could tell that my voice was just starting to drop at that point. It's really nostalgic, but anyways, at that point, I basically was done, and it was really exciting. So at this point, I decided to start learning actual words, vocabulary, and so on, to start actually, hopefully, understanding the Japanese language, right? At this point, I was like super into anime. I just went full weeb mode. My friend was telling me about various shows I should watch. I'd watched a couple at this point, like Death Note, Attack on Titan, No Game, No Life, Fate Zero, among other ones, right? And also High School DxD. That's kind of like, it's not appropriate, in case you guys are watching this video and thinking you should watch this out in public or something. Definitely not, something that you should watch unless you're by yourself or whatever the case may be. But anyways, I was really into this stuff at the time, and so I decided, all right, let's just figure out how to understand all this stuff, and I'm going to start with, some pre-made decks and Genki, just to build a foundation. That's what I told myself. But yeah, that obviously was not a very good idea. Even though I had known about AJATT, I didn't really pop into it yet. I didn't really understand anything about it, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So, I went into Genki. I decided to do like an hour a day of that, and learned a bunch of other words from a pre-made deck. That's what I did every single day, but I was really not engaging with the language every single day, the actual language, like the stuff I wanted to understand. It was basically just textbook material and things of that nature, right? Nothing that was really going to help me, understand the stuff in real time. Like, I started noticing after a few months passed of me doing Genki every single day. Again, I was really, really dedicated. I did that for like an hour a day. Nothing was really happening as far as my comprehension goes, like months and months rolled around and I wasn't understanding pretty much any more than I actually was before. And, I still pressed on because I figured, maybe one day this will all make sense. But, alas, that did not happen. I kept on, going and going and going and spinning my wheels, doing, Genki every single day, finished the first book, got into the second book. And, I was, I believe, 17 at this time. I was, I just turned 17. I was still doing the same schedule every single day, just still staying really, really, dedicated to Japanese and really, really obsessed with this idea of I'm going to learn the language well. And March 2015 rolls around, and I'm in the library at my high school, and I come across videos by mattvsjapan, who at the time only had 78 subs or something like that. It was pretty insane. And basically I found out this like how to make SRS sentence cards, and all these other videos he had at the time. He had a handful of videos, and it was just like a really hidden gem of a channel. And I'm sure you guys probably all know that now because he ended up taking off. But like back then, I was just like, why is this guy so unknown? He has so much to say, and like he really knows his stuff. So I watched his video, and I'm like, this guy actually understands all this stuff. Like, he was making all these sentence cards, and I'm like, that's where I want to be. So, I just commented, telling him how cool it was to see him make all this progress. And, I kept on, hanging around that channel because he kept posting new videos about AJATT and stuff like that. He talked about how to make the monolingual transition and all this other stuff, how to learn Japanese. And it was really, really cool to see because, he basically was where I wanted to be in the Japanese language. And I kept on, commenting on his videos. And I guess he could probably just sense that I was really, really passionate about it because I kept asking him questions and things of that nature. So he told me, hey, like if you want, I can, have you add me on Skype and, we can talk about this and you can ask me all of your questions and stuff like that. And I was like, that's really cool. And this was about, and by the time I actually started, talking to Matt, it was about summer 2015. So I was like 17, maybe almost 17 and a half at that point. And so I'd been into Japanese for, well over a year at this point. But, obviously I wasn't really making serious progress because after RTK, I basically just, I was still doing Genki and some structured study, but it wasn't really getting me anywhere, for reasons I guess I'll talk about later. But yeah, I started talking to Matt, I Skyped him and, I basically told him what I was doing. And he basically told me about AJATT and things of that nature. And, he told me, all right, you got to read the website, and basically we drew up a little plan because I was showing him what I was doing. And at first he didn't understand what the problem was. He was like, all right, well, what's the problem? You have all these like sentence cards, whatever, right? But obviously, I didn't really elaborate that I was just getting these from pre-made decks and like I wasn't actually immersing and stuff like that, and that I had no idea what I was doing. But basically he just told me, all right, just read the website from from top to bottom, then, get into take hymns, finish that as quickly as possible, do one at a time. That's also what he said. I'm also a big proponent of that as well. I do believe you should work on one thing at a time whenever you, try to focus on some goal in life. But he just said, all right, do one thing at a time. First, the AJATT website, then, go through, take hymns as quickly as possible, and then start mining sentences from native Japanese material, stuff like that. Basically just immerse, listen to Japanese passively 24 hours a day, whatever the case was, right? Just some basic AJATT 101. And so I said, all right, sure. And so I basically just spent the whole next month reading AJATT and, doing the Take Him's Guide, which I was not a total noob at this point because I still knew the kanji. So it's like going through Take Him, I basically knew a handful of the vocabulary. Although the funny thing is that I couldn't pick them out in real time. It's funny, right? Like, just because you know a word, I'm going to go off topic a little bit here, but it's just funny. Like, just because you know a word does not mean necessarily that you're going to be able to pick it out in real time from native material just because it's like part of your brain at that point. You know what I mean? It's like you got to like, I found out later on that obviously if you don't hear it enough times, you're not going to be able to actually recognize when someone else says it. Because of all the, potential patterns and different usages and so on. But yeah, it's just really funny that at this point I had been studying Japanese for like a year and a half and understood like 1% of anime and stuff like that. It was pretty funny. But yeah, I think I've been rambling on long enough at this point. So yeah, I did RTK, or not RTK, sorry, I did Take Him's Grammar Guide after reading the AJATT website. And that took about a month. I made sentence cards for the entire thing. And then I, basically started hopping into the fun stuff, which was I started immersing for the first time. I basically just started watching anime and, my stomach's rumbling right now. I haven't eaten anything all day. I decided I would record this video before doing anything so that I still had energy afterward, because I feel like if I tried to do this later in the day, I wouldn't have the energy to actually recall everything. But yeah, anyways, continuing on here. By the time I was done with Take Hims and, getting into the fun stuff, which was immersing in anime that I loved, that's when things really started to kind of kick off, right? So this was near the end of summer 2017 at this point. And I was about to be a senior in high school, right? So 2 years had passed, or 1 year had passed. 1.5 years had passed since I got into Japanese at this point. And I'm not cutting that out, by the way. I promised I would just keep this as organic as possible. You guys can roast me about it in the comment section below. But anyways, yeah, I was about to go back to my senior year in high school at this point. So I was 17, and I still had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I really didn't know. And to be honest with you, I still don't know at this point. But at that point, it was like, basically that's when everybody was getting ready for college and stuff like that. And, obviously the SATs were a thing and so on. So, I did have to also kind of balance that a little bit. I had to kind of, take a few practice tests for the SAT and, make sure that I ended up getting admitted to school. So, that's exactly what happened. I tried to balance AJATT with all that stuff. And, obviously I did kind of fall off a little bit. I made like 240 sentence cards from some of my favorite shows like Akame ga Kill or, manga as well. At this point, I was like mining from like written sources and anime and stuff like that. I'd made like 200 something sentence cards and I kind of fell off. But then at some point around like November 2015, I think I was already like done with the school applications and stuff. I kind of just found out that I didn't have to try anymore. So at that point, I just went full out AJATT mode. And, I finally was able to pick it back up because I'd fallen off for like almost a little while. I don't know if it was like a month or not, but I was basically still reading, but I wasn't really making some sentence cards, and, reviewing them was such a pain because I didn't know what I was doing. I was putting like 3 to 4 new words into, I was learning sentences with like 3 to 4 new words, and that obviously did not work out because it was just information overload to the point where I couldn't really even recall what the hell anything was, what was happening or any of that stuff. So, I fell off for a little bit, but then once all the college stuff was taken care of, I did well enough on the SATs to just get into school or whatever, and the admission came. I just said, all right, screw this, I'm just gonna get senioritis big time and just go fucking AJATT mode all the time. So that's what I did. I hopped into it, and I found out about this one anime called Shokugeki no Soma, which you guys probably know. Obviously, I never really got too far into it after the first and second seasons because it kind of just fell off in my mind. But at the time, it was like only at its first season, and it was like really amazing. I got into it, and that totally fired me up again because it was something I really, really loved. And, it was, one of those things that kind of sparked my interest in really just learning Japanese all over again. So I started, doing a lot of sentence mining from the manga. I watched the anime a lot, and I definitely had a hell of a time listening to it as well, on repeat. Stuff like that. I would listen to it everywhere. I should also mention too, like this whole time I started doing AJATT, I was listening passively. I started going to school with earphones in, I basically like had my iPhone or my iPod in my pocket, and I just, slipped earbuds through my ears or through my shirt and into my ears. And I just, listened to Japanese when I was walking around the hallways. When I was in class, if I could get away with it without getting caught. And, yeah. I don't know, it was just like I was still listening this entire time. That's what I wanted to say. Like, even though I'd kind of fallen off a little bit here and there, I had, still been keeping up the listening and stuff like that. And by the time Christmas 2017 or 2015 rolled around, it's a lot to really take in, guys. Sorry, I'm trying to really think about this. It's been a long time. But yeah, by the time 2015 rolled around, I was, consistently reading, for about 2 hours a day. I was watching anime for at least 2 hours a day, and I was doing all my anki reps and making new sentence cards and so on. So, I mean, overall, and plus I was listening, on a daily basis for at least 12 hours a day, because like there were times where I got caught in school. There were times where I couldn't do it as much because obviously I wasn't allowed to have my earphones in, but it was just ranging from at least 12 hours a day of passive listening, and also, about 4 to 6 hours of like active study every single day, right? Depending on how I was feeling. On weekends, I'd go above that because I could just spend all day doing Japanese, right? But, by the time I found out about Shokugeki no Soma, I was doing that like, I really just picked back up, and I never stopped since then, right? So that was basically my strategy, and I was still doing monolingual sentence cards, which means I had like English on the back, and so English definition on the back, right? The Japanese sentence on the front, English definition on the back. By the time Christmas rolled around that year, 2015, I thought I was ready to start doing the monolingual transition, because at this point I'd been doing AJATT for a couple of months, and I felt like I was kind of ready to start. And yeah, so I contacted Matt. I'm like, yo, like, how do I do this? How do I set up the dictionaries? Because I was kind of like one of those people who, I guess, it kind of felt safe to have someone, who had already done this, teach me how he did it, so I could kind of feel like, all right, if I do this, I'm going to get, similar results. And obviously, I was not very independent at thinking back then, but yeah, I just thought maybe I should just ask Matt, like, what kind of dictionary setup he uses, so I can just copy it, go with that. And he was really kind enough to just, show me how he did it, and I just set it up that way. And it was really awesome. It was really, really awesome of him to help me that way. And then I started doing the sentence mining. It was really sick. I started, searching up some basic words. I started redoing some, basic words that I'd already known in Japanese, so I could kind of get an idea about how monolingual definitions worked. And at first, it was pretty difficult to do. I was looking up like a million different words per definition, obviously, because I didn't know what I was doing. But once I started going full monolingual, it was really awesome, because that just meant that there was no English in my study process at all. It was just total immersion, and it was just really awesome. I know that Patrick talked about this one time in one of his older videos, like a long ass time ago as well. He just said, I've gone monolingual, which means I'm no longer using English to learn Japanese at all, right? And at that point, I had, finally crossed over to that point. And so going into 2016 now, I was about to turn 18 years old, and, my senior year was wrapping up. At this point, I mean, school was just a joke. It was basically just going to school for the sake of going to school. Everybody else was in their zone, the juniors, sophomores, and freshmen. But my class, the seniors, didn't give a shit about anything. We basically just weren't doing anything. So I could basically get away with studying Japanese, all day. And I admit that, like, when I was in school, I definitely cheated a little bit here and there. As a senior, whatever. There were some bullshit classes I had to take. I just, like, barely passed some of them. And, some people were just, like, doing whatever. So I just decided, all right, let me just, like, half-ass this and get through. So, that was kind of stupid. But it is what it is, and nobody cared. So we just ended up blasting through that year, and I was just doing AJATT the entire time. And it was kind of cool as well, because around the end of my high school years, a couple of my friends in high school were, they started getting into Japanese. And for some reason, they knew I was like, I was really into it. So they asked me like how to learn it and stuff. And that was really cool. So, at some point I started watching anime with one of my friends, Raw, in, one of the band sound rooms, which was kind of funny. Like, we'd go down to the music room and like literally just pull out our school computers, and like I would download anime and then like upload it onto the cloud, so that basically, yeah, I would just like download it and upload it onto Google Drive, so that I could, just get to it in school, because the school filter had kind of blocked all the anime websites, and so we could just watch it. And that was really awesome. Around, I guess, the end of my senior year in high school, so, nearing around May 2016 at this point, I had around 3,000 sentence cards in my deck. And, really, I'm not going to like delve into every little detail about my journey. I do remember what I was reading at certain points in my life, like spring break, whatever. I'm not going to talk about that. I just kept up that typical, grind that I told you about, at least 2 hours of anime, 2 hours of reading, making new sentence cards, reviewing and listening passively the entire day. I just kept that up the entire time, from November on all the way until I graduated from high school. And near the end of high school, I had about 3,000 something sentence cards. And I was getting way better at understanding. Like, I started actually understanding anime. I got into this show called Owari no Seraph, and I was understanding a lot of that, which was really cool because I'd only been in AJATT for like a few months at this point, maybe about half a year or whatever the case was, and I was like really, really getting there. And I'm like, wow, I'm like understanding thousands of words. This is like, there's a stark difference between this and what I'd done the year before with Genki and whatever. Like, yes, that technically counts as a part of my Japanese journey, but I don't typically count that as real progress because it was just complete nonsense. I wasn't getting anywhere, But let's just keep going here. So summer 2016 was probably one of the most productive periods I've ever had in my life. And, it's kind of sad because 18-year-old me puts 24-year-old me to shame now. Basically what happened was as soon as I entered summer, it was just going to be summer AJATT all the time. And at this point I was also friends with some people as well. Like, I still talk to Matt. I think I had seen the other Matt, Brit versus Japan, on Twitter a couple of times. I also had a Twitter, so I would, talk to my other AJATT friends on there at that time. And that was all really cool. And during, summer 2016, before I went off to college, I, basically was doing AJATT literally all day. So basically what happened was I would get up at 4:30 in the morning. I would, I would listen to something on my iPod, go downstairs, eat breakfast, and, read the Japanese news or something, try to save as many sentences as I could and email them to myself. And, then after that, I basically would go upstairs. I would read for an hour, so around 6 o'clock in the morning, I had already read for an hour. Then I started watching like 4 episodes of anime. Then I'd read for an hour again, watch another 4 episodes of anime, I would eat lunch with, earphones in, listen to some Japanese and also read some stuff again during lunch. Then after that, I would read again for an hour. Then I would watch another 4 episodes of anime. Then I would read for an hour again. Then I would do, all of my cards for the, sentences I found that day. Then I'd finish reviewing, and I was also like reviewing my anki cards, basically sporadically throughout the day, so I wouldn't have to do them all in bulk. And then by the time it was like 7 o'clock p.m., I had already been studying Japanese all day. I'd read for like 4 some odd hours, watched an entire like season of anime, like at least 12 episodes or something like that raw. And then, I had already made like, I don't know, anywhere from like 15 to like 30 sentence cards, somewhere around there most of the time. And then I would, eat dinner with earphones in as well. And, after that was over, I would also have something up. I would pull up something and just read it in Japanese or whatever the case was. And then I would just go on a walk around my neighborhood, with, anime in my ears just to kind of relax, whatever the case was, just listen to some of my favorite shows, come back around like 9 o'clock, take a shower with Japanese in. I had like a shower speaker, and then I'd get out of the shower, go into my room, connect my iPod to a Bluetooth speaker, turn on one of my anime playlists or whatever the case was, my immersion playlist, and then I would loop that all night, just lights out, and then I would repeat that again. And so the entire summer I was just doing that shit basically all day, every day. And as you can expect, I really just skyrocketed things. By the time that summer was over, obviously, I was in a pretty big hole at this point. At this point, I had already been hit with like depression and stuff like that. It was like completely different than before. I started getting hit with like depression. I started really like, for some reason, just not really being happy in life. I totally started, not feeling very much for the people and surroundings around me. And I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later, but at this point, I wasn't really ready necessarily to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to be doing in college, and I kind of felt like if I went to college, it would just be, I don't know, me trying to like half-ass classes when I tried to do AJATT, and so that, wasn't really exciting for me at the time. Although if I could go back, I totally would have enjoyed college more for sure. But yeah, around 2016, like summer 2016, around the time that was over, I basically had around 5,000 sentence cards at this point. So I hadn't even been doing AJATT for about like a year at that point yet, at least hardcore. And, or maybe I was just around a year at this point into AJATT. And I had like 5,000 sentence cards. I was able to read about 2,000 kanji by the time my first year anniversary came for AJATT, like basically almost Christmas 2016 at this point. And I was understanding a lot, right? I watched Attack on Titan, which was one of my favorite anime of all time. And I was understanding like 80% of the first episode, and I'd probably say around 50-60% of the entire show in about, 1 year of doing it. And also, like in college, my first roommate's arrangement was kind of a disaster. The guy wasn't a bad guy, but we were completely different in terms of our, temperaments in life. Like he was a partier, he had people over in the room all the time, and I just basically couldn't really have like a safe haven to really age at anymore. So I basically started going to the library and hanging out there, and I was just doing work for school, and then, obviously like basic stuff I had to do, like expository writing and all this other stuff I had to take. And then I would go into the quiet rooms in the library to watch anime. And then I would just hang out in the lounge, the student lounge in my dorm, and I would just make the sentence cards there. Sometimes staying up all night to do it. I still was like in AJATT mode. It really does show the power of habits. At this point, because I'd been doing it every day, I just couldn't see a life of not doing it. It was just insane. And so I kept on doing that. I kept repeating it again and again and again. And at this point, I started getting deeper and deeper and deeper into depression. It was like, I guess, kind of understandable because at this point I was in college and I was really like, I was trying to balance college and still keep up the insane immersion that I had so accustomed myself to. So I was doing that every single fucking day. And obviously it was a full-time burnout, right? Because like college is a full-time commitment and so was AJATT. But I've refused to give up on AJATT when I was in college because I just didn't want to stop. So I kept on doing it again and again and again. And I should also mention that when I went to university when I was 18 years old, in the very beginning, so we're not just talking winter at this point, I did take this Japanese language placement test when I went in, and I placed into like advanced Japanese or whatever, right? So that was really awesome. But I didn't take it though. That's the problem. So I really didn't take it. So at least not until a few years later. But that's something I should add as well. Like when I took an actual exam, that was kind of cool. I was like that kid who was like over prepared because I'd been studying Japanese like a fucking maniac for the last like year. So like kanji wise, everything, I was like really, really good at writing things out from memory and, reading. My reading was on point as well because I was reading all day, every day. So that was really awesome. It was like one of the first times I kind of felt any real world gratification for this whole AJATT grind I was on. But that's just something I should mention. And we're going to keep on basically going with the journey here. So around the end of 2016, I, had already totaled well over 6,000 sentence cards. I was understanding a decent amount of Japanese. Well, when I say a decent amount, I could understand a lot of the shows I was watching. Obviously not everything, because I was just doing brute force, like blunt force trauma kind of studying, where basically I just fucking did it all day. And sometimes I was not very like efficient about it, which I'll talk about later. But I kept on going with the grind, just making cards, reading, watching, whatever, and still somehow managing to pass in school because I was at least, I was still at least present enough to do well enough in classes. But obviously it was a huge problem, when it came to like expository writing because I had to write, articles and shit. So I was in the student lounge all fucking night and I was still listening to Japanese on the side. I refused to take it out of my ears. So I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to fucking deal with it. I'm just going to listen to this immersion all day, And so that's exactly what I did. And, basically, once winter break happened, winter breaks in college are pretty damn long. They're like an entire an entire month in length. So basically, you can do whatever you want for like an entire month once you go home, right? Because basically you don't live in the dorms, you just go home for winter vacation. So during that time, I just kept on immersing again. It's just like at this point, there was literally no like, there was no saving me at this point. I was like so fucking far into AJATT that there was no way I was ever going to do anything else. And it's actually really scary in hindsight. Like I'm describing it, but you guys do not have any like accurate depiction of what was going on in my mind at the time. Like I was in a pretty dark place. I was like literally AJATTing all the time, to the point of like social isolation. And I was basically just doing it all day and I was living this fantasy world. It was literally like, I don't remember a damn thing about my first semester in college, except for maybe some of the rare moments I was present. But I was watching things like Guilty Crown and like a lot of anime, you guys know, have like pretty morbid ideas behind them. And so I was like surrounding myself with some pretty dark shit all the time. And damn, like I literally had tunnel vision. I couldn't see anything outside of AJATT. I was like doing it all day. By the time 2017 rolled around, I had like 7,000 sentence cards, somewhere around there. 7,000 sentence cards, so we're talking like a year later, a mere year after starting AJATT, I had like 7,000 sentence cards, somewhere around there. And I used my other AJATT senpais to fucking pushed me forward. Like I knew Brit versus Japan had around 7,000 cards as well within a year. Like it was just, he was a monster. You know, he was really dedicated, and I just used that as fuel. I'm like, well, I need to like keep myself on par with all of these other people who are going hardcore, because like, you know, it was just really, really cool to see all of these people make this progress, right? I basically had met a couple of other AJATTers at this point, you know, Matt, Patrick, you know, there was Brit versus Japan, which I didn't really talk to him too much, but he was a really chill guy. I mean, I could just tell based on his videos. You know, he's the kind of guy I'd definitely get along with. There was also Dan. You guys probably know Dan. He was like, I guess he was still doing AJATT at the time as well, and he was really cool to talk to about whatever. But yeah, so around March 2017, or no, not March 2017, around 2017 in general, I was still keeping up this whole AJATT journey, and you know, it was pretty dark. Like I remember at some point I ended up having to move dorms because I couldn't deal with my roommate anymore. And again, part of this was just me being immature, because I was just like that spoiled kid who was just like, no, fuck it, I've got to AJATT. And you know, he was obviously like a partier. It was just one of those things that I just like, I don't know, if I had just been a little bit more open, it wouldn't have been a problem as much. Maybe, I don't know. Like I'm just, at this point, I'm kind of just still, you know, on the fence about that whole thing. But I started sleeping in the basement, which you're not allowed to do in college. You're not allowed to sleep in the lounges and shit like that. So, you know, obviously people had reported me a couple of times because they found me like sleeping in the basement and shit. And at some point I also started like, you know, I started dragging a chair into this like really isolated room all across the basement in this like fucking abandoned warehouse to keep immersing in Japanese, because like there was so much noise in college. And, you know, obviously, you know, back then I didn't have any kind of idea of balance and whatever, right? And this notion of having fun, which I kind of regret at this point. But at that point, all I wanted was Japanese. So I just kept dragging a chair into this fucking deserted room, this dark corner in the middle of nowhere, and I just started listening to Japanese all day and doing the same thing I always did, which was just, you know, immerse and mind sentences and so on. I kept on doing this, and I think I got into ReZero around, you know, March 2017 at this point, so I was about 19 at the time. And yeah, it was like a pretty damn depressing time. I remember this just day after day after day, waking up and, you know, just going to classes and just, you know, as soon as I got home, just going to the, you know, media center or something like that just to keep up AJATT. And just kept on going and going and going in that, you know, same cycle. And there was something else I wanted to say, but I kind of forgot what it was. But damn. Yeah, I was also like, I guess, still keeping up my, you know, my coursework as well, because I was doing some random stuff. I was taking classes, you know, like business and what else was I taking? I was completely undecided anyway. I was just taking things that would count as like, you know, credits, and also things that, you know, would have fulfilled any basic core requirements. So I was doing those things, just taking core classes, whatever. And this was, it all got too much to a certain point. By the time I was like, I think it was like almost April or around March 2017, I had a half-baked suicide attempt, and you know, that was you know, that, you know, I probably shouldn't have said that, but yeah, it's like, yeah, there was a time where like I was pretty bent on leaving this world because I was not happy at all anymore. I was so fucking like out of my mind because of like the overwhelming amount of work to do in school, and also just trying to keep AJATT up, and also just my personal you know, issues of not being able to just, you know, not being able to really just be normal and just talk to people and whatever, you know, the normal things that people enjoy in college. I just decided I kind of had enough, you know. And I also was like, I would talk to my parents occasionally about this stuff, but like, you know, I ended up basically just being told that, you know, these things I was worrying about, it was kind of just like my problems were midgetated. I wasn't really, you know, going through what I thought I was. And like, obviously I didn't really have a close social circle to really talk to about. I didn't realize I could just go to guidance in school and just tell them about my problems and just ask for some help. So I just decided at some point, like, fuck this, you know, I'm totally done with life. And, you know, fortunately I didn't end up doing it, but, or I didn't end up going through with it. It was kind of, you know, whatever, it was half baked. Like, I guess I just kind of snapped at some point, but, you know, I was living in a, single at this point as well. It was really awesome. Like I did end up getting a single. I made friends with somebody a while back who was a supervisor of the building I lived in. So I guess that was a blessing. But she basically knew I was sleeping in the basement, and so she told me, dude, like if you want a double, there's like another empty room on a separate floor of this building. If you want it, it's yours. And I'm like, all right, sweet. And so yeah, one day I just like moved out, and I started living on my own, which was awesome. But at the same time, I was getting really, really isolated, and the people on my floor were fucking loud as hell. Like, I remember, even to this day, I still don't really necessarily like that aspect about college. It's just like the blaring music, the people who just like stay up till 3, 4 in the morning, just fucking talking through the walls, and at the time when I went to college, I always just assumed that people were like, it was just like a really like studious place to go, like when you were just really like bent on learning something and just whatever, right? But it was just like, a lot of it was just like, it was like half partying basically, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it was just like, I was basically sold on this idea that, everyone was like super serious or whatever the case was. And I still remember at the time, like, you can just tell I'm getting sucked into this dark mindset again. But it's like, this was fucking almost 6 years ago at this point. And so basically just, to cut through all this stuff, we'll get into that a little bit later. Around the end of April of 2017, I basically just took a bit of a break from Japanese for like maybe a month. I was doing like cards, and I was trying to I was still doing my reviews, and I was still like trying to immerse a little bit, but I wasn't hardcoring it for a little bit because I decided I needed a break or something like that. Who knows? Maybe it was just fate that my mind was telling me I just needed to walk away for a little bit, but I walked away for like a month at that point. It was around the time Matt also, I guess unofficially quit AJATT, right? He made that video, the 3-hour video, and I would watch that. And, obviously I was so deep into it at this point that like, I guess they call it like sunk cost in psychology, right? Like the sunk cost fallacy. When you put a lot of time and effort into something, it's very fucking difficult to walk away. So I ended up back, within about a couple of weeks, I ended up back doing it because I just felt like I was withering away. I was like, no, this is something that I identify with. This is like who I am. If I fucking walk away from this, I am going to, not be happy with myself. It's like, it felt like my whole fucking heart and soul was withering away when I didn't do Japanese. It was just like, it was so like ingrained in my life at that point that I just couldn't imagine a life without it. So I got back into it again. And around that summer, all I did was AJATT again. Basically, watched Hunter x Hunter, did some stuff, it was a pretty damn depressing time, to be honest with you. 2017, just all that summer, just doing AJATT all the time. I still talk to Matt, I believe, occasionally. At that time, I was still on Twitter and stuff like that as well. And, I talked to him occasionally. I was also like using that Skype channel, thing he talked about in one of his videos to try and talk to Japanese people, because I felt like, all right, fuck it, I'm learning Japanese. It's like, I might as well just use the language as well, right? Because most of it was just input at that point. I was just getting like pure input, watching stuff, just listening to stuff all day, but never really conversing with people, And so I wanted to try and do that a little bit. I, talked to some people there, here and there, but, nothing's extreme, but that whole summer was basically just immersion again and stuff like that. And, by the end of it, and at this point, I started getting fucking weird as hell too. I started doing stuff like lucid dreaming. And I started, I really just started going off the deep end. I started watching some like spiritual videos about lucid dreaming and shit. And I actually had some lucid dreams that summer. I was just like really, really, really weird and fucked up, mind-wise. But it was kind of cool too. I just started like keeping like a bit of a dream journal on my phone, trying to like get better at memorizing my dreams. And then, the few times I actually did some reality checks, I actually ended up becoming lucid in my dreams and stuff. But this has nothing to do with Japanese, but I just thought that would be kind of funny to throw in there, that I was like into lucid dreaming at the time. And so I basically also started reading about that in Japanese a little bit too. Like I found some articles about stuff. Of course, I was still trying to like implement AJATT into it. So I tried to like read about it, and I learned a little bit about that as well. In Japanese, I just tried to read some like articles I could find. And then like around the end of summer 2017, I had, I don't even know, like well over 8,000 plus sentence cards at this point. I'd been deleting a lot of them as well, because a lot of them were like shit sentence cards that I was making from like novels that were like ridiculously hard and like just full of like chock full of bullshit that I'd found that were like super rare words and just things that Khatzumoto told you not to do on the website, right? Like going after challenging things. I'll talk about that later. But I'd been deleting shit all the time from my deck. So, I mean, I probably had made over 10,000 sentence cards at this point, but I had like 8,000 something, like maybe 8 to 9,000 in my deck at that time. And so I went back to school, fall 2017, and I kept doing the same shit, At this point, it was just like really, really like kind of degenerate. But I was also set to take the JLPT N1 that year. So 2017. So I was just immersing, getting, deeper and deeper into it. I was still taking like core classes only at that time. What did I even take? I took creative writing, 2017. I took some other stuff in college. And, what else happened? And basically that's what it was. I was still like doing AJATT on the side though. It was like pretty fucking, like I was like really deep into a hole at this point. And, I mentioned this a handful of times. I've probably said that like a billion times this entire fucking video so far, but I'm sorry guys. Like I'm just trying to like, get this all out. And basically what happened was, around 2017, near the end of it, I ended up taking the JLPT N1 and I passed it. And so after that, I just kept on going. It was like I was literally in such a like grind mode that I was like, all right, I passed, but then, I'm just going to keep on AJATting. So I just kept on doing that. I kept on, listening to stuff and like, mining things. I got into Naruto at the time. I was watching like the entire season and I was very much a completionist. I fucking watched the filler. That was one of my problems as well, was my completion mentality. But again, that's like something for another segment of this video. But by the end of this entire thing in 2018, I was probably the best I'd ever been at Japanese. That was around the time, like once I passed or whatever, around that time, I think I did an interview with Matt. And, because that was back when Matt started, his Patreon, and also he started like really just, uploading videos onto YouTube regularly. And at that point, he was just like, all right, maybe I could interview you and, we could talk about your experience and stuff. So I said, fuck it, sure. And so that was basically the making of the interview that you guys may have seen on his channel, right? The interview with me, like the AJATT since 2015 video. And at that point, I'd say that was probably close to like the best I was at Japanese, maybe. At least in terms of, fuck it, as far as like comprehension goes, that was probably one of the best I'd ever been at. Like that was when my vocabulary was, as high as it had been, my comprehension and so on. And I was understanding a lot of what I wanted at this point. Not everything, but I was understanding a lot of it, you know what I mean? It's like, not everything, but like enough to like just watch anime raw and like all the stuff I guess I might have been after subconsciously when I started the entire thing. But then summer rolled around, and I did the same thing that summer, right? I basically, like, at least in the beginning, I did the same thing. And I'll never forget it. Basically, it was just like getting up early in the morning, just studying my ass off again, just because I said to myself, I'm still not satisfied. I want to take things farther and farther and farther. And so I decided, fuck it, like, let's just keep doing this. And so I did it again that summer. I was watching NHK Niyokoso or whatever, and, SAO, just some anime I'd never really gotten into to sentence one just for fun. And sooner or later, the unimaginable happened, which was that. And I also, tried to make, subtitle files for High School DxD as well, because that was, one of my favorite shows. So this was, 4 years into starting Japanese at this point, just to give you guys some framework to deal with. This was about 4 years into Japanese. Around summer 2018, that was, almost 3 years into AJATT at this point, right? We're talking about at least around 3 years since I'd found out about AJATT, and I had known Matt at this point for 3 years. And fuck, man, when you say it like that, it's kind of crazy just how long it's been since this whole journey started. But yeah, around 2018, the unthinkable happened, which is that I burned out. It was kind of insane. I guess maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's fate or something. Maybe some things are meant to happen, and maybe I'd reached that point that I needed to be at in order for other things to happen. Who knows, honestly. But, I should say I'm kind of spiritual now, but at the time I just burned out, and I started, getting into other things, exploring other things, because I kind of had enough of this. At some point I was like, dude, I've been doing this fucking nonstop for years and years and years. I have not enjoyed a fucking lick of my college experience, and this is ridiculous, because I literally didn't go out at all. I didn't talk to anybody. It was just completely unhealthy now that I think back about it in retrospect. Is it necessary was it necessary for me to have dedicated a lot of time to Japanese to learn it? Yes, but I don't necessarily think I needed to go this far. But that's, again, I'll talk about that a little later. And I did promise you guys that this would be a really fucking rambly video. But, and again, I apologize if I'm going off here. But anyways, what happened was I burned out around 2018, summer 2018. And I started just, I started exploring other hobbies. I started, watching these videos on fitness and bodybuilding. And I'm like, fuck, maybe I should get into this. It seems kind of fun. I'd gone to the gym a couple of times with my friend, one of my close friends that I mentioned, the same friend that got me into Japanese at the same time. I was talking about this in like 2013. The same friend that I'd known forever, basically. We hung out, and because he went to the same university as I did. We lifted some weights occasionally, but then eventually I just started getting into it really, like around near the end of 2018. I said, fuck, like, this seems really cool to do. I just really want to like, get out there a little bit more. So I decided to fucking, just get into weightlifting. That's that following semester, which is what I did. At this point, I decided that I would just like major in Japanese or whatever the case was, so that I could just like get something going. So that's what I ended up doing. And at this point, I ended up having to take Japanese classes. And so yeah, I took Japanese 401, which was like the I guess that was like the advanced Japanese class. Like that was like the one that I was able to take. So I decided, all right, sure. That's not the same one I tested into, I don't believe, but I got permission to take 401 or whatever, which was like, that's like the, I guess that was basically the most advanced class they had there, at least in the undergraduate class. So I decided, all right, I should probably just take this. And so at that point, the funny thing was I wasn't really studying Japanese actively anymore. I was taking all these classes, and then like I was basically just training. I was just going out, actually socializing a little bit for the first time. I was going out to, train at the gym a lot. I was talking to people in my dorm for the first time and stuff like that. It was a complete radical 180 from where I'd been, the other 2 years in college up until this point. And I have to say, it was like a really welcome change. Like I really, to this point, I had not been talking to anybody. I'd been making zero memories the entire fucking time I was in college. And then, that third year was a total transformation in terms of like just getting out, talking to people a little bit more, just, having a little bit of fun, like talking to people and actually just, getting to know people and stuff instead of just fucking just not doing anything the entire time I was there. But I was taking Japanese classes, and one thing led to another, and I ended up finding, this program because one of my Japanese teachers, she talked about it in class, and basically there was a opportunity to go to Fukui, Japan, which was basically a year-long program where you basically like, I don't know, there was a historical kind of connection between the University of Fukui and the university I went to. So I decided, I guess something just told me to go talk to her about it. So I just talked to her about it. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'm interested. Or I think she told me, she was like, come to Fukui. I asked her about it. I'm like, what's this? And she just told me like, come to Fukui, whatever the case was. And after talking about it, and she did tell me like, okay, you need like JLPT-N2, whatever the case was, or I don't necessarily know if like, she said that to me, but I think I saw that on the flyer. Like, if you have JLPT-N2, you can take the Japanese program, not the English one. And she was like, well, do you have that? And I'm like, yeah, I actually passed N1 like a year ago or something like that. I don't know exactly how long it had been at this point, but somewhere around there. Yeah, been about a year at that point. And so, yeah, she basically told me that I should, go meet with the director of this program and stuff like that. I don't remember exactly how this all happened, but I ended up somehow and going into this program, and this was after I had basically walked away from AJATT at this point, and I was still taking classes, but that was involuntary. I had no choice but to take them because I was like basically studying Japanese in college at this point. So I decided, all right, fuck it, I've got nothing to lose for this. Like I've always wanted to go to Japan. Like I never had gone up until this point. I should also mention that I'd never gone to Japan up until this point. So for the 4 something years I'd been studying, I basically did not, I had never stepped foot in Japan. And so around, the beginning of 2019, basically I met with the, one of the, I guess, coordinators of the program. And yeah, I don't know. And also there was a transfer student from Japan, from that University of Fukui at my school. And, he was there, he was basically, I'd seen him around campus, but I didn't know necessarily that he was like in that program. But then I saw him at the, the meeting, and I talked amongst, the people who were there and things of that nature. And, basically one thing led to another, and I ended up getting into that program. And so that's basically what happened. I was scheduled to study in Fukui for like a year, just go to Japan, and technically the credits would have counted. So I said, all right, whatever, and I went because I said, screw it, I'd always wanted to go. And the funny thing too, like to this day, it's still strange to me. Like all the time I ever wanted to go to Japan, I never had a chance. But once I walked away from Japan, like I just said, all right, I'm totally done like studying Japanese. I'm just going to go move on with my life. That's when that's when the opportunity came. And it's still strange to me to this day. People talk about detachment and stuff like that. I'm starting to believe some of that is true to a certain degree. But anyways, more on that later. So I decided, all right, let's just do it. Let's just give it a shot. Let's see if Japan is for me or isn't for me, because like that's an entire year, right? So, screw it. I'll at least get my chance to figure it out. And so, yeah, I ended up going. And that summer, I guess I had a bit of a spiritual awakening. I talked about like having like lucid dreams and stuff like that. And, a couple of summers earlier, but this was like summer 2019 at this point. I started like, I don't know, I guess I started delving into some pretty strange things. And, I started like really, I was kind of dissociated from the idea still. I was still like scheduled to go to Japan, but I was not, and I was still hanging around the AJATT community in terms of like just seeing some posts and stuff like that, but I was still conflicted. I'm like, well, I'd kind of moved on already. I've been into like other stuff at this point, but I'm still scheduled to go. So what do I do about this, And like I decided, all right, I'll just make the most of it. And so then I ended up going that summer, by the end of summer, because I was just basically biding my time away. I was just deep in thought in my room at home. I was still like at my parents' house still, obviously. And I was just, I think at this point I was 21 years old. So it had been about 5 years since I got into Japanese at this point. And, by the time summer ended, I ended up going to Japan. And I'll never forget the first time I went to Japan. It was very, very mind-blowing of an experience. Like I still cannot put this into words. Like if you guys have never been to Japan, maybe you'll experience this as well. But I know that for those of you who have, it's totally like a mind-shattering kind of experience to finally like step into another country. It's just like a complete dimension shatter. It's like, dude, I'm elsewhere now, like there's an entire different culture and, surrounding than what I was born in and, where I was raised. And it was one of those things, it was just one of those surreal moments for me. I took a trip to Hong Kong, basically first. It was basically a 15-hour flight. It was like totally exhausting. But when I made it there, it was just so interesting. I got off the plane and, I wasn't even in Japan yet at this point, but I had a layover there for like a few hours, like 6 hours or something like that. Then I had another flight to, I believe, did I touch down in Nagoya? I'm not really necessarily sure. I think so. And once I was in Japan, it was like a really, really interesting kind of experience. And I also drank for the first time on the plane. And I was kind of like, I don't know, I was like kind of drunk on the plane. It was kind of funny because they did offer alcohol. So it was just funny. I remember like, just kind of like turning a bit red and stuff, and it was just really hilarious. And like I was just like, dude, can I have I asked the flight attendant, I'm like, can I have another glass? And she was like, all right, sure. And yeah, basically I had to actually fight to not fall asleep during that flight because it was like a 3-hour flight. Then I touched down in Japan, and basically at this point I had to take a train, like 2 trains actually. And it was a really long and arduous journey to get to my hotel, which my pops had booked. And it's like really, it was really interesting of an experience to get there. I had to ask people for help. It was, it was totally fine. When I got to Japan, I was able to speak Japanese. And so it was not necessary, and I could read it as well. Like, even though I hadn't been studying hardcore, it's like, it hadn't been deteriorating at this point. And I did do a little bit of like immersion before going to Japan to make sure I wasn't going to like fuck around when I got there, and ended up getting lost or whatever the case was. I did do some preparation, and, eventually I took, one train to, another stop. And then once I got off there, I asked the man like, hey, and it was funny. Like there was this one young person, I think he was a young kid around my age who like helped me, like, cause I had to get off at a certain stop and I didn't know how the trains worked or any of that shit. So I'm like, hey, like, I just have to ask you a question real quick. And then he told me about this one app that tells you about the stops and stuff. And, he basically just told me when to get off, and he told me, all right, like, this is where your stop is. I'm not going to be there the entire time, but like, when to get off, right? I'm like, yeah. So I got off at that point, and then I had to like take another like 2-hour fucking train all the way to Fukui. And that was like really tiring. At this point, like I nearly blacked out. One thing led to another. I got on the right train, fortunately, and then I was on my way. But it was pretty frightening because like one wrong move and I would have ended up in a completely random fucking place in Japan. And again, it's like, luckily it is Japan and it's pretty safe. But like if it were another place, this would have been like totally nerve wracking to do, So, off topic, but props to anybody who does international travel, because it can be pretty dangerous. But anyways, I touched down in Fukui. I remember like getting off at the stop. It was really awesome, the dinosaurs and all that shit at the station. And yeah, I mean, fuck, it was an amazing time. There was like this dinosaur in a lab coat sitting on the bench, and I got in there and, I nearly blacked out on the train on the way there. Like, obviously, because at this point I'd gone like 2 days without sleep. It was fucked up. But, I finally made it to Fukui, and there was like a hotel right outside the plaza, and this was the night before I was going to get, greeted by the folks from the study abroad program. So I basically was going to stay the night there. And when I got in, I just, I told them that I had a reservation, and, everything went pretty smoothly. He just showed me to my room, and I just stayed there. And then there was a free breakfast the next day. And so I got off. I went downstairs. I woke up at like 7 o'clock in the morning. I was literally like fucking out too that night. Like, obviously you guys can tell I was out because like I had probably like jet lag built up or whatever the fuck, but I was like out. And the next morning I woke up, ate some food. It was like some really good food. Went out, around the time they said that we needed to meet. And I was like hella excited, man. And I met the woman from the, who basically worked at Fukui University. And she basically, introduced me to some people. She told me that we would all group together at this time and that the bus would be here at this time. And, we could just chill up until then. So I just chilled all around the stations and stuff. It was a really awesome time, man. Just walked around and just saw some sights. It was just like really fucking surreal to be in Japan. Like after all those years of studying Japanese in my room, all that depression, that time of nearly killing myself, it's just like, I'm like, well, I finally made it, and, it did happen. It did not happen the way I thought it would, whatever the case was, of course, but at least I got there. And, there was just something very different. I still consider that, the truth today too. Like there's just something very different in the air. Like when I was in Japan, it was just a very, very unique kind of place. I still consider it to be. And, then I went to the university and, I guess the procedure started. I met my tutor. I think she was a freshman at the university I went to. She basically, told me about things, the way things worked, whatever the case was, and things were just, started to kind of unfold. I started getting into the classes that I was going to take. There was orientation. It was just a really, really eye-opening experience. It was a total life-changing experience. It really was, the study abroad. But I started, signing up for classes, and everything was just kind of smooth. I just started getting into, whatever it was that I had to take, and things were kind of cool. We had to take a placement test. I did place into the highest level Japanese classes that you could take. So I think they went from levels 1 to 5. I went into Japanese 5, and I had to take 2 classes for it. It was more or less, I guess, pretty self-explanatory, but I guess the classes were fairly difficult in some aspects because you actually had to read a real book in there and write reports on it and so on. And one of them was like a presentation class where the teacher was a total bitch. I don't necessarily feel shy about saying that because, yes, she was kind of good in some aspects. Like she just didn't allow you to take shortcuts, which was totally fine. I understand that. But like she was just unnecessarily rude. At least that's how I felt it. It was just one of those like really, really rigid kind of experiences where, I don't know. I'm just not going to get into it at this point. But anyways, first semester was, pretty cool. It was really cool. I just went to classes. I saw the transfer student who went to my school when I first arrived there. It was really funny. Like I was in the computer lab and he was just like, what? Like, when did you show up here? And I just like waved to him. He was just like, yeah, when did you get here? And, anyways, it was kind of really, really cool. Like I liked the different change in atmosphere on the campus as opposed to like what it was at my school that I went to, because like it was pretty quiet and, pretty awesome. Like when I went to the media center, the library, people were really quiet. People just kind of respected the fact that it was a library and you were supposed to just study there and whatever. So it was just really cool, and a couple of my friends that I made there, I made a few Japanese friends, right off the bat when I was in, the office outside of the office of the international relations place, right, the center there. I made some cool friends there, and things were really just, things were really awesome. I started socializing and so on, but even then, like, I guess I still had some problems during this whole, trip, because I basically ended up isolating myself as well. I started like saying no to people who were asking me to like go places, and I just was fucking focused on studying all the time, which I kind of regret. Like, obviously going out, like I feel like if you do travel to Japan, going out and actually seeing the sights would, that would be something that I would prioritize. If I were you, like if you have a chance to go to Japan on a student visa or whatever the case is, like go out and actually see the sights. You know what I'm saying? Like that experience is like you can study in your home country and outside of it, but Japan, like going to Japan, being in Japan and seeing the sights, the traditions and all that stuff, that's a once in a lifetime thing, especially as a kid. Like you're 20, 21. I was 21 at the time. But like, yeah, if you're like a young kid in your late teens, early 20s, just go out and, see the sights and just talk to people, go to some different stores and whatever, right? Just see some, and see some like monuments and whatever else, right? Temples, all that stuff. I would totally recommend anybody who goes to Japan actually go out and, experience life there, right? Don't do what I did. Just stay inside all fucking day and just study and, act like that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, like I didn't end up doing that well in some of my classes anyway, because, you can't tell what you're going to do. You can't tell how well you're going to do necessarily, because the teachers kind of, they decide what you do. So, some of the classes that, I went in, I actually did not do too well in. I was just like kind of just spinning my wheels. I was going to class. I was late sometimes also. And that was like basically when the classes were, still in person. And then obviously the unthinkable happened around, the second semester. So basically near the end of 2019, 2020, the virus hit. And that was not fun. Obviously, once the virus hit, people started going home. The program fell apart. All of our lives just were completely like transformed, because obviously in America, you guys know about the quarantine, but it's also, similar. Everybody had to wear masks here, and everything just instantly went online. The semesters were pushed back several months, and by the time that happened, it was like a completely different experience than the first semester, because classes were isolated, the dynamic was totally different. You couldn't just get away with just showing up to class at a certain time. And I did have to scan into classes, but now it's like there were timestamps, you had to show up and all that stuff. And it was just like, forget this. So at that point, I ended up like leaving the program. And, I have not gone back to school since. I'll be honest with you guys here. And so that was about 2 years ago. And so basically at some point but I didn't go home though. I still stayed in Japan. I just was not part of the program anymore. And then I just basically kind of just, stayed in Japan until my visa wore off, and then I went home. And since I've gone home, I literally have not been the same, And some of my close friends, I guess one of my friends, the same friend that, got me into Japanese, he knows this as well because I told him about it, but I've never been the same since I came back from Japan. I've totally been like dissociated from reality, because like it was such a change in atmosphere, especially for a year. Like if you guys go to Japan for a year, it's like a pretty radical change in lifestyle, surroundings, and even language. So like by the time I came back, it was like, what the fuck is this place, right? Because I'd lived in America my entire life. I'd lived in America for 21 years, but it put into perspective a lot of things that I never considered. Like, dude, there's a whole other world out there, and I'm not literally just like living in this one stationary kind of reality. There are other people out there, other countries, other, traditions and so on. And I've only just seen a glimpse of it. And like, it just completely shook my world up when I came back. I couldn't snap out of it. It was just so strange to literally within like an instant of a day or two be surrounded by totally different people again with a totally different language. And even though it was my native language, I still could not be like, all right, I've been here for 21 years before. And, I ended up even like going back to my house at home before, but I was like, dude, what is this? Like, I know this place. Like, it's all familiar to me in terms of the 3D, but like, I've been here, but I haven't been here. You know what I'm saying? It was so weird. Like, I don't know if any of you guys can relate to me, but, drop it in the comments below if you have had a situation like this where you've stayed abroad for a long period of time and you come back and it's all of a sudden like, what the fuck? Like, what is this place? Because for me, I had complete reverse culture shock. Like, I guess it was kind of culture shocking when I went to Japan for the first time, although I guess not really. It wasn't exactly as strange because I'd been studying Japanese for fucking 4 or 5 years up until that point by the time I actually touched down in Japan. But, it was still not as strange as I was expecting to be. But when I came back to America, it was like everything was like completely different. The cars looked different because you guys know, like, I guess certain like styles of cars in Japan are different. Like, things are kind of uniform, whatever the case is. In America, like, I guess the cars look, at least to me, they look a little bigger than they did. It was just like everything is totally different, especially since when I lived in Fukui, that city was, I guess, pretty genuine Japan. It's not like, an urban surrounding where you find a lot of like, foreign shops and whatever the case is. It was just like a literal, like, Japanese surrounding. And it was so different than anything else. And like, so by the time I came back, I'm like, yo, there's something off here, because it's like I've been living here for 21 years and I don't feel like I've ever been here in my life before. And I've been in that mode ever since. I came back to Japan I came back to America, and I have not been able to really like reassimilate back into my life here. It's just been so strange since I went to Japan. Like, I do believe that, the people who told me this when I went on the program for the first time, they were totally right. One of the coordinators who was, overseeing the program, when I went to the orientation at my school, back at home, that is, she said, like, when you stay like in a foreign country for a year, you don't come back the same. There's always something different when you come back. And, she was totally right. I just totally feel like a different person. Like, certain things have been put into perspective, such as, again, just the fact that there's so much out there I've never seen. And, I guess in and of itself, that's kind of a cool thing, because it kind of just shows you that, hey, traveling has its merits, and, language learning also has its merits, because there's no way I would have ever experienced certain things, like talking to people and so on, had I not actually studied my ass off with Japanese earlier. But that's basically where my journey comes to a close. The study abroad was very, it unfortunately had to end because of, the freak accident of the pandemic, but it is what it is, and, yeah, that was unfortunate, but whatever, it's all over and done with now. So anyways, yeah, so now I want to reflect on some stuff, maybe give you guys some Japanese tips, if any of you still follow the AJATT method today. I do know that, obviously there are some evolutionary things that have been made to it as far as changes go, but, I do believe that there are some things I can recommend you guys that would definitely help you out if you're still studying hardcore and so on. And yeah, so let's hop into it. So first of all, I have this part of my outline that says reflections on my motives and my journey. So yeah, let's hop into that. Let's be completely honest here. So what motivated me the most when it came to Japanese? Obviously, it was anime. That's something that goes without saying. I'm not shy about saying that anymore, because it's like, at 24 years old, it's like, what do I have to be ashamed of when I say stuff like this, Really. Like, basically, anime was a big motivator for me. It was totally, like, totally new to me, and kind of blew me away when I first found out about it. It was just a very beautiful kind of media that I had never really associated myself with before. The characters, the storylines and so on. It just really makes you think deeply. The language is beautiful. The openings and endings, like the music is awesome. Like, you guys know how it is when you find anime or anything new in general. Like, you just start getting, dopamine hits, I guess, and it just kind of totally overwhelms you to the point where there's just so much new stuff you can take in that every day becomes a fucking adventure. And that's what happened to me. I found out about anime, and that was the primary thing that I was always interested in. The funny thing is that I really was not, like, looking back in hindsight, like, speaking sounded kind of cool, but at the end of the day, it was kind of like, most of it was just to understand anime and, like, these types of, like, fantasy-based works, as fucking pathetic as that sounds. That's literally what really, like, motivated me to do this, and the spoken thing was kind of a cool side effect. When I went to Japan, I could talk to people, but whenever I would actually talk to people online, like Skype channel and stuff like that, I felt like I was kind of forcing myself sometimes, so it's not like, the spoken aspect is necessarily objectively harder than other aspects. Some people love to speak to people. Other people are kind of like, they feel like it's an obligatory thing, because for me, it was like, I had to, I was pushing myself to study Japanese for many years, and obviously I needed to make sure that I was using it for something practical. So I kind of stepped out of my comfort zone and tried to talk to people in Japanese a lot. But looking back, it wasn't necessarily one of my primary goals from the start. It was just to understand the, fucking popular culture media, So, yeah, that's one aspect of it. What really got me to this point as well was, I guess, my upbringing and other factors, other extraneous factors of my life, such as, when I grew up, I was pretty normal, in elementary school, had a decent amount of friends, but as I started getting older, I became more and more isolated. And by the time I was in high school, I did have a friend group, but I was kind of the clown in that group. I was kind of the guy who, would just, like, get in trouble to fucking get social approval from my friends, and, like, I kind of felt like I was the odd person out if anybody was going to get cut from that group. And so it was kind of like, I just felt like I had some fake friends in high school. I'm not saying I was perfect either. I wasn't a perfect friend necessarily, but it was like, you get the idea. I was kind of isolated, and I didn't really have too much of a social presence in high school. So I basically just I was one of the perfect candidates to really get into something like a language and, to look elsewhere, because I said, well, I'm not super happy with my life as things stand currently in America. So, obviously, unconsciously, I guess I started looking elsewhere, thinking, all right, this is, it could be a cool opportunity to, experience something different in this world, And also, I guess I had a handful of, like, familial issues growing up. My mom and my dad had a bit of a, strained relationship when I was growing up, always talking about divorce. It still has never happened. Obviously, it's pretty clear that they were not a good match for each other either. But I grew up with some stuff, having some, I guess you could say some pretty traumatizing things happen here and there. I don't want to like over exaggerate that either. It was just basically just, some violence, like, just physical things, and also some other stuff like that. And, there's a lot of yelling, a lot of like really, really, mean stuff being said all over the place. And, in addition to all of that, I guess it was just that I couldn't really ask my parents for emotional support on top of that. And, obviously as things went on, I just didn't really feel like, I just, I didn't feel wholesome. So I felt like I was one of those candidates who could, look elsewhere for happiness. And that's where I kind of, ended up getting into Japanese. It was definitely one of those perfect kind of matches, like, because I was one of those people who didn't really necessarily have too much going on at school. Like, people knew of me, but it was like one of those things where I couldn't really, connect with people on a deeper level. Like when people would hang out amongst each other out after school, I was not there. I was like by myself pretty much. And I was always vying for people's approval too, which I always hated about myself growing up. But sooner or later, I just dropped that when I found Japanese. And that's, I think, one of the things that I used Japanese for, was to kind of empower myself. Because growing up, it's like, again, my parents were like occasionally pretty dismissive about anything I would complain to them about. It was just like, again, I don't want to get into total, like into like all of these details. But basically, yeah, there was some like, there were some like physical issues in the house where like, I guess I was like slapped a couple times growing up, whatever the case was. There was definitely some like physical aggression growing up, and again, it's like I'm past that point at this age, because again, it's like I'm sure it's not that hard or not that easy to be a parent. But nevertheless, it's like I was not very happy with my circumstances at home. There was a lot of fucking yelling and screaming, and yeah, I don't know. It's just like there was a lot of mean stuff being said, the kind of things that like, I don't know, I don't really want to get into it, but yeah, basically that kind of stuff definitely pushed me into isolation a little bit. When I would complain about stuff, sometimes, people would go to their parents and say like, I'm not feeling well. And they say, oh honey, it's okay. It's going to be all right. But then my parents would be like, yeah, trust me. Sometimes they would be like, trust me, it doesn't get easier from here, whatever. Like, and it was just like, it always felt like I could never actually like, confide in anybody in my immediate family to really help me out with anything I was feeling. So I just started using Japanese to cover all that shit up. And, I don't want to like, paint this in a way that it's like, oh, my family was totally fucking degenerate from the start, just not a single stable moment. But it's like there were ups and downs, there were times where things were okay, but I'm just, I just wanted to put that into perspective as well, that it was just, not exactly very normal. And that's what led me down this path. And that definitely was a big motive for me, was just, I guess, being on my own, finding something in life that made me smile again. And Japanese definitely did that, and of course, a lot of this came unconscious when I was young. Like, I did not consciously know how to express myself back then. It was just me pent up with a lot of like different feelings, constantly being like having my opinions invalidated and gaslighted by my parents at times. And, things like that. Like, even when my parents found out I was kind of suicidal in college, my mom just went on like about how if I kill myself, I'm going to end up going to hell and stuff like that. And it just like, all this stuff really just ended up motivating me to study Japanese. Like, that's what I'm getting at. I know this is like a pretty dark kind of rant here, but I've never really talked about this to anybody before. So yeah, I decided at some point that it'd be a good idea to make a video about this. And so that's what I'm doing now. And so yeah, that all together, coupled with the isolation, and realizing that I didn't really actually enjoy my friends' company, because some of them would like talk behind my back about things that I said, hey, don't say this, to so-and-so, and they would just do it. And all of that, I just said, fuck this, like, forget this. I'm just going to leave all this behind and just like study, just drown away all this shit with all these like, beautiful soundtracks, awesome characters and so on. And, that's exactly what I did. So, yeah, that was definitely like one of those key aspects that, got me to that point was, not necessarily feeling too connected with my family, very distant from my family, and also just from society in general. I started getting into Japanese. So that's the key takeaway here. And because I feel like I'm pretty fucking rambly. It's pretty incoherent what I'm saying. So hopefully you guys, got something out of that, really. And yeah, so as far as like my journey goes, so it lasted a couple of years, and I will say that the key takeaway from this entire AJATT thing is that, well, I would say the best thing that you can gain from this is just confidence in yourself that you can learn a skill, because it does teach you a lot of things about, motivation, just staying in the natural flow of things, habit building, and also just in general, if you want to master something, it just does show you that, there's a specific process to it, right? There are sacrifices you have to make, and all of this, ends up being a pretty cumulative experience where, you feel like you can do this again for something else. And that's what I took away from it, is feeling like if I need to master something else, I do have confidence in myself that I can take things to the extreme again and, study really hard and, kind of make it in that regard, instead of just, leaving things up to chance of, oh, I'm just going to go take a class and hopefully things work out. It's like, no, you can actually take things into your own hands. You can actually, customize the process so that you can find something that fits you, and you can use it to better yourself and really just kind of excel, right? So AJATT does teach you a lot of very valuable motivational skills, learning processes, and so on. I really do believe that is the key takeaway of learning Japanese. I know Matt talked about this before as well. He talked about, like, on Twitter a long time ago. I think he said something along the lines of, like, what I gained was, like, not just, learning Japanese to a high level, but it was also just all of these other skills, that relate to mastery in life or something to that degree. I don't remember exactly what it was. Probably fucking butchered that, but you guys, if you were around for that long on Twitter, it's possible that you probably saw that, So yeah, anyways, that is basically it for me on my like motives and journey. Obviously, I think I kind of delved into whatever it was I wanted to say at this point, I'm pretty sure. And holy shit, it's been like an hour and a half at this point. But yeah, let's get into tips for future Japanese learners now. So all of you guys who find out about AJATT or, some, deviant of that method or things that are built off of immersion-based learning, what types of things can we take away from this whole experience that I've had? What kind of recommendations do I have for you guys learning Japanese and so on? Let's hop into it. All right, so this is going to be, I think, the last section of the entire video. So let's do this. So the first tip I have is ultimately have fun. This is something that Khatzumoto talks about, in detail and shit. But basically, I definitely do believe that that's a very undermined aspect of learning, because having fun it really is a key that unlocks something in your brain that allows you to perceive things and become more perceptive to learning what it is you're trying to learn. So I would say that the number one thing you should prioritize when it comes to immersion-based learning is to find things you really deeply identify with. For me, it was like certain anime shows that I really loved, like fucking Tokyo Ghoul and Fate Zero, and some things like this, like Attack on Titan, things that just really stimulated my mind with a strong sense of emotion, and, things that really made me excited for the day. Like, I want to understand this. I want to learn this. Like, that's what I would focus on. Like, you got to find things that you love like that, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter what it is. There's no judgment for me here. You guys, whatever it is you like, I would really focus on trying to implement that as much as possible. Anything that really motivates you to say, right, let's do this. Let's study Japanese, and I'm going to be excited because I get to use this thing. Could be a video game. It could be, a drama. It could be an anime. It could be anything. It could be, just whatever you find fun in the Japanese language that utilizes native Japanese. Fuck it. Do it. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what it is. And, yeah. So that's the first thing, fun. I would actually prioritize that over almost anything, because if you actually have fun doing it, regardless of how difficult it is, you're going to take the time to do it, like some of the anime I liked were not very easy to do, or not very easy to understand. They had some pretty like challenging Japanese in them, like Fate Zero, but if you like it, you're going to spend the time actually taking the time to do it. So that's the first thing. The next thing is I would prioritize common Japanese words first and avoid falling into this trap of showing off, which is, again, something that Khatzumoto talks about. So I do believe a lot of what Khatzumoto said was, fairly, all laid out there on the original AJATT website back in the day. But basically he talks about, talking about like a hemorrhage, and he's like, no, just call it a fucking cut, like on your arm or whatever the case was, right? It was something about that. Basically talking about it's very tempting, he basically mentions that it's very tempting to take what was I trying to say? Basically, it was like it's tempting to just take things that are really, really like showy and like look rare and like really awesome and trying to prioritize those things. Like you see rare kanji and you're like, oh, I got to learn that shit. Or, oh, this word looks like it'd be so cool. Like if Japanese native speakers find out that I know this word, they're going to like be so blown away. But like all of that is kind of like ego lifting at the gym. You know what I'm saying? It's like you got to focus on the fundamentals first. And this is something that I believe Matt also, like, he gives a really good tip on his channel in the very beginning of his whole like YouTube career, where he says, add a word to your list if you see it more than once, right? If you're sure that you've seen a word more than once, then learn those words, prioritize those words, because those words are going to greatly improve your comprehension, as opposed to just learning some fucking weird thing that only shows up once every fucking 10 books you read. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to find something that, you got to start prioritizing words that you're seeing and hearing a lot that are really going to help you out, really common words, sky, water, fire, whatever the case is, and even some basic grammar and stuff like that you hear a lot, these types of things, right? I would pay the most attention to the stuff that's going to really skyrocket most of your comprehension before you start focusing on really weird, like obscure kanji and words that you just want to learn because you feel like, oh, this is going to make me look so cool. It's kind of like, you know what I mean? It's like training again at the gym with like shitty form versus just like perfecting your form. I would totally focus on just learning things that you see commonly at first. It's very tempting to, just ignore that like really rare kanji, but again, it's rare for a reason, It's like not all words have the same kind of weight in your comprehension and in your everyday life. So I would focus on, and same thing with like even understanding a lot of shows and shit like that. There's a lot of stuff that is recurring that's very useful and very common. And I would use a lot of your energy, especially in the beginning, to focus on stuff that really pops out all the time, because like that's just what's going to help you the most. You know what I'm saying? Like learning a lot of like rare kanji, I've been there and done that. What happens is if you don't immerse in Japanese, the common stuff stays and the fucking, really obscure stuff just slips from your memory because you don't use it. It just makes sense that way, right? Why would your brain keep it if you just don't use it? And also, if you have to use a lot of force to maintain it, it's probably not very useful information from the start. Like I've had a lot of cards like this in my sentence deck before, which is what ended up actually leading me to delete my original sentence deck, was the fact that it was cluttered with some of these cards. Like I'm like, ooh, I want to just like increase the amount of kanji I can read, like past the 2,000 plus Joyo kanji. So let's just fucking find any word we can possibly find that has weird kanji in it that I've never seen before. And let's add that to our list and just learn that and, brag to native speakers about how I know X amount of kanji. Like that doesn't matter as much. Okay. You would be better off if you're trying to like learn the language well to just focus on things that really fucking matter in the beginning. Maybe you can focus on that little special spice a little bit later. But, and if it is, and the thing is also that if you use Matt's rule of like learning words that you see more than once, if it really is common, let's say it turns out to be a common word that just happens to have like, obscure kanji, you're going to know because you'll see it multiple times. And if you don't see it, well, you probably don't need to know it. Like if it's like what Matt said also in one of his older videos about how he quit Anki or something, right? He said like, if you're reading Japanese for multiple hours every day over a wide variety of topics and some word that you happen to know now doesn't show up often enough for you to just maintain it, you don't need to know it. So it's the same thing, just, again, I've taken my point home here, but just focus on stuff that matters, focus on common words first, common things, simplistic things as well. Oftentimes people have this tendency to like, oh, I got to one-up it. I'm an adult now. I got to read an adult book. But sometimes I feel like the child's book could be a better explanation because it teaches you in a very simplistic way the same concept that you're trying to learn. So, like I would just focus on that. Finally, I wrote down here, don't let it ruin your life. But you do need to dedicate a good chunk of time to Japanese per day to actually get anywhere significant. And so I do believe this. Now, you should not take things as far as I did. For example, I listen to Japanese in my sleep, in the fucking shower, all these things. Now, again, if you're really busy and you really want to learn Japanese, you might have to find ways to squeeze things in like this. But for me, it's like I took things to the absolute extreme. I immersed all day to the point where it was unhealthy. I don't remember 2 years of my college, experience. Basically, I don't remember 2 years of anything that happened in my first 2 years of college, right? That was like 2 years of missed out opportunities to talk to some people, whatever, right? Make some actual memories. You don't have to take it that far. You can still immerse, for X amount of hours a day, and you can still get far, if you're actually dedicating yourself with a good plan, you have like a really decent understanding of what needs to happen for you to learn these things, learning Japanese through Japanese, using material that you want to understand in order to understand itself, things of this nature, and you're actually, mining sentences, getting healthy input, getting, healthy sentences, and, things that are just, motivating you to keep doing this as well, then you're going to be fine, especially if you do it for a couple of hours a day, right? Let's say you study Japanese for a few hours. And then you immerse for a couple more hours, like you just listen, when you're like in transit, you're like on the bus or something like that, maybe in the car, whatever the case is, like you can still get decently far. Now, obviously, the more you put into it, the faster you're going to get there. But I do believe there does come a point of diminishing returns. I do believe after a certain point, it's kind of like overtraining. I do believe that some people say overtraining is a myth in terms of like training at the gym. But I do believe after a certain point, if you just keep doing it nonstop, at some point you're going to wear yourself out, and it's probably going to have an opposing effect on how well you can acquire things because your brain's fucking exhausted at that point. So I would say don't push it too far to the point where you're literally struggling to keep yourself awake during immersion and stuff like that. For me, I took things to the extreme again. I went into the basement in my college dorm, in some fucking dark corner to get my immersion in, all sorts of stuff, staying up late, literally just like getting ready to tear my hair out just because I couldn't like listen to, whatever it was I was trying to listen to, constantly rewinding, episodes, because I thought I missed something. You don't have to take things to the absolute extreme. And in fact, I do believe that if you're a perfectionist, that can actually hamper you when you are, studying Japanese. Because what will happen is that you will be so fucking caught up on all these tiny little details, that may not make a big difference in the long run of things, right? If you just, immerse and you're having fun, and you're watching anime intentfully every single day, or not just anime, it could be anything you're fucking interested in Japanese. As long as you're watching it intentfully, and you're giving it your all, you're actually getting, healthy sentences, you're actually doing this every day, and it's all adding up over time, it's more or less going to be okay, right? If you do it for a few hours a day. So, yeah, that's probably more important than literally dialing down every little detail about, oh, I can't skip filler in an anime. Oh, I have to finish this. I'm a completionist. I don't enjoy the show, but I can't drop it because I need to make sure that my stats go up. That kind of shit always hampered me back in the day because realistically, like, you can watch the same show multiple times, man. Like, you really can. You can watch the same show multiple times. And it's not like it's the end of the world if you watch an anime with English subtitles and then turn it off and then like go back and watch it raw again, Like the English subtitles, objectively speaking, you will figure out like what it is that makes them somewhat inaccurate later on if there are some inaccuracies presented in these anime, right? It's like you can kind of piece it together once you actually understand Japanese. You can be like, oh, like the way that they translated it, this sentence is actually kind of backwards in Japanese, whatever the case is. Or maybe they exaggerated this point because there's no actual equivalent. But like just because you watch with English subtitles at first is not going to hamper you. And in fact, I actually would recommend you do it occasionally, and because like especially if you don't understand anything, that way you can like really latch onto the plot and then just turn off the subs so that it's not completely boring, right? And things like this. Like, I guess I'm kind of rambling on a tangent here, but the whole point is like, don't let it ruin your life. Don't like develop OCD tendencies like I did. You don't have to literally dial down the perfect thing. There have been lots of, I think there was this one study by someone named, he was presenting it in a talk called 1% Better Every Day. There's a guy named James Clear, right? He wrote a book called Atomic Habits, which I have not read, but I've heard of course. And he said there was this one experiment where there were two groups of students, and one of the groups was going to get graded based on how many pictures that they made or something that semester. And then the other group was just responsible for getting graded on making one perfect image. And they found out that the best images came from the quantity group and not the quality group, because you need quantity to make quality. So, the whole point of this rant is just, perfection sometimes fucks you up. Like sometimes you have to just put the reps in, and that, comes in the form of just watching things, just allowing yourself to not understand things. You can't just be one of those people who has this 100% mindset where I have to understand this now. There's a time and place naturally for things to be understood in Japanese. And so really you got to get to a point where, you just let things happen at their own good time, right? Divine timing, they call it. Because I really do believe that if you try to force something, in 40, 50 minutes, and try to learn it right then and there when you're a complete beginner, like you're basically torturing yourself for no reason and getting a worse off understanding of comprehension of that sentence than you would if you just waited like a year, and like a year later you're like, oh, there's that thing, I finally understand it, because I've seen stuff like this happen in my own journey as well. So, because things just didn't make sense, and then one day they just kind of did, and I wasn't consciously trying to figure it out. So again, don't use OCD as well, and like just take things a bit easy here and there. I'm not saying don't study. That was another aspect of this bullet point, which I totally fucked up and went away from. But basically, yeah, you do need to dedicate a certain chunk of time to Japanese, but certain little details don't matter. And, at the end of the day, it's just about, okay, do you have a consistent study process in place that's going to, get you to continue to progress day by day? And is it enough? Because if you're doing like half an hour a day, that's probably not going to get very far, right? So, if it's the best you can do, I understand. But like, again, if you really want to actually like learn Japanese really well, then I would figure out how you're going to implement at least a few hours. I would say like, I don't know, 3-4 hours of Japanese a day, somewhere around there, and you don't have to go as extreme with the listening. Maybe if you miss a day or two is okay, but I would try to, implement as much time as possible in a way that doesn't clutter your entire life up, right? If it gets too much, I would prioritize your mental health over anything else. Don't get to a point where you're literally like thinking about ending your life over this stuff. It's just not worth it, at least not in my opinion, Ultimately, it's like, what do we do in life? We do things to make ourselves happy. And if it's not making you happy and it has an adverse effect, then it ain't worth shit, at least not in my opinion. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind, right? Don't ruin your life over it, but, you still need to put in some hours to make this happen every single day. And yeah, I think that's basically it. This didn't end up being a 3-hour video like Matt's, but it's a pretty damn long video. And I thank all of you who have ever sat through this in the future and watched it. And hopefully it wasn't a rambly mess of a fucking video. It's like really, really, I know it was all over the place, but yeah, hopefully this was an interesting listen to all of you guys. Yes, once again, this is BenAJATT, the person that Matt interviewed on his channel a handful of years ago. I think we're coming up on 5 years ago now. And I just thought it would be kind of cool to talk about. Oh yeah, and let's just talk about one more thing too. While we're at that, like what is my Japanese level at right now and where did I ever reach? Well, I would say my Japanese peak was probably 2018, summer 2018, because at that point I had not stepped away from immersion yet. So at that point I was able to understand a lot of what I wanted. And when I say a lot, I mean basically anything I really cared about. I was constantly just continuing to dig into new shit that I didn't understand, just to keep like getting my stats up and to keep learning new words. But when it came to stuff I started the journey for, like certain anime, I could understand most of it by that point, like literally almost all of it, I guess, like with the exception of maybe a few words here and there or whatever the case was, but I could understand it. And I was able to speak Japanese when I went to Japan, which was kind of interesting too. That was another thing I didn't mention during my study abroad little chapter, was when I went to Japan in a completely different circumstance than a handful of people would, which is that I already had been studying Japanese for years. I got off the plane able to speak Japanese, and when I was in Japan, I definitely I knew Japanese well enough to actually like make friends and stuff. And obviously that was really helpful, because at the end of the day, it's like language is a huge part of communication. Like you cannot have a genuine friendship, at least in my opinion, without learning how to converse properly. Like if you can't talk well, then things don't even begin as far as conversations go. So I would definitely say I was able to speak when I went there, and I did get better when I was in Japan too, of course, because I was trying to speak it sometimes. But yeah, I was able to speak, and I could read more or less anything I really cared about too much. When it came to manga, I would say most of it is simplistic enough that I would have been able to understand most of it at that point. And novels, I was able to read through those too as well. I was fairly slow at reading them, but I was like a really, really dialed in OCD kind of person who tried to understand every little thing and overanalyzed it. So when it came to that, I could read pretty well too, at least light novels and whatever other weeb stuff I was interested in at the time. I definitely could have understood that stuff by the time I was in 2018 or so. Now, where am I now? My Japanese has gone down the drain for sure. There are certain aspects of Japanese that are very difficult to get rid of in terms of basic acquisition. So at this point, I still understand it. I probably can still speak it, even though it'll probably be rusty. And a majority of that bulk weird, vocabulary that I'd been learning, again, like that show off vocabulary, a lot of it has probably fallen by the wayside, because again, it's it just gets deleted after a while. And so I haven't touched it in well over 2 years. And at this point, I definitely have seen some drop in ability to the point where it's no longer where it used to be. But at the end of the day, it still is what it is. If you really put in the hours, it's kind of cool to see that things don't really fade away that easily. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. It's kind of a cool insight. Like if you do get to a certain point in the language, you're not going to lose it that quickly. It can happen occasionally, I do believe. Like if you're not at a certain point, it's like very difficult to keep a hold of the language. But if you've done it enough times with enough intent, it's going to be there. At least, the bulk of it or the fundamentals of it for a pretty decent amount of time, to the point where I don't think I would seriously start forgetting unless I literally didn't touch it for years and years and years at this point. But I know a lot of people were kind of curious about that. But yeah, I'm not where I used to be in Japanese anymore, of course, because I haven't studied it anymore. And I just want to say thank you once again to all of you guys who listened to this all the way through. There were probably a handful of things I forgot to say that I, was planning on saying, but I think this was basically the entirety of my Japanese learning journey. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who took the time to listen to this, because it took a lot of time to just sit down and record this. And hopefully that was informative. And that's basically it for me, guys. Peace.